The night you believe your life is over may quietly become the night it finally begins. I did not believe those words when I heard them years ago. I certainly did not believe them as I drove through the Cascade Mountains with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my fingers ached. Rain crashed against my windshield in relentless waves while fierce winds pushed my SUV toward the edge of the narrow road. Every flash of lightning illuminated towering pine trees before darkness swallowed them again. I should have turned back an hour earlier, but there was nothing waiting for me behind except an empty house and 30 years of memories that no longer belonged to the future I had imagined. Earlier that afternoon I had signed the final divorce papers. The attorney had offered a sympathetic smile, slid the documents across the desk, and quietly wished me the best. That was how 3 decades of marriage ended. Not with shouting. Not with tears. Just signatures and silence. My husband had fallen in love with another life long before he admitted he no longer wanted the one we shared. I kept wondering whether there had been a single moment when everything changed or whether love had simply disappeared one ordinary day, while I was too busy pretending everything was still fine. I had rented a small cabin beside a mountain lake because I wanted one weekend without phone calls, neighbors, or well-meaning friends telling me that time healed everything. Time had not healed anything yet. It had only taught me how to hide heartbreak behind polite smiles. A sudden orange barricade appeared through the rain, forcing me to break. A county park ranger walked toward my window, his rain jacket soaked through by the storm. After I lowered the glass a few inches, he shook his head before I could even ask. The highway is closed. A mudslide blocked the pass. Nobody is getting through tonight. My stomach tightened. Is there another road? Not until tomorrow, maybe longer if this weather keeps up. I glanced at the dark mountains surrounding us. Is there anywhere nearby to stay? He thought for a moment before pointing toward a narrow gravel road disappearing into the forest. There is an old lakeside cabin about 3 miles from here. It is privately rented, but it is your best chance. 20 minutes later my headlights revealed a weathered cedar cabin standing alone beside a lake hidden beneath sheets of rain. Warm golden light glowed behind the windows, making the little building seem impossibly welcoming against the violent storm. I hurried onto the porch carrying my overnight bag, barely reaching the front door before it opened from the inside. A woman stood there holding an old lantern even though the lights behind her were still on. She looked about my age, with chestnut hair resting against her shoulders, calm blue eyes, and an expression so quietly kind that it immediately softened something inside me. She looked surprised to see me standing there. I apologized for arriving unannounced and explained the road closure. She listened without interrupting, then glanced toward the dark forest before looking back at me. Before she could answer, every light inside the cabin flickered twice and went completely dark. Only the lantern remained, casting a warm circle of light between us as thunder echoed across the lake. She smiled with gentle resignation and stepped aside. You had better come in before this storm decides for both of us. I crossed the doorway believing I had simply found shelter for the night. I had no idea I had just stepped into the first chapter of a life I never imagined was still waiting for me. The woman closed the door behind me, and the sound of the storm immediately softened beneath the thick cedar walls. Rain still drummed against the roof with relentless determination, but inside the cabin everything felt unexpectedly peaceful. She placed the lantern on a wooden table before lighting 2 candles from a nearby drawer. Their warm glow spread across the room, revealing shelves lined with well-loved books, a stone fireplace, and large windows overlooking a lake that had completely disappeared behind sheets of rain. I am Evelyn, she said with a gentle smile that seemed effortless. Claire, I replied, slipping off my rain-soaked jacket. Water dripped onto the old hardwood floor, and I instinctively apologized for making a mess. Evelyn simply waved away my concern. The floor has survived decades of mountain weather. I think it can survive one more storm. I laughed quietly, surprising myself. It was the first genuine laugh I had heard from my own voice in months. She noticed but did not mention it. Instead, she disappeared briefly into a hallway before returning with a stack of clean towels. You probably want to dry off before you catch a cold. I accepted one with grateful hands. The soft cotton carried the faint scent of lavender, a comforting fragrance that somehow made the unfamiliar cabin feel welcoming. Another crash of thunder echoed across the valley, followed by complete silence from every electrical appliance. Evelyn looked toward the ceiling with patient acceptance. That confirms it, she said. The power will probably stay out until morning. She walked toward the fireplace, carefully arranging several pieces of dry firewood before striking a match. Within minutes, bright flames danced behind the stone hearth, filling the room with warmth that slowly pushed away the damp mountain chill clinging to my clothes. I was planning to make soup before the storm arrived, she said. Would you mind sharing dinner with a stranded stranger? I smiled politely. Only if another stranded stranger can help. She nodded toward the kitchen with amused approval. That sounds fair. We worked side by side in comfortable uncertainty. I chopped vegetables while Evelyn stirred a pot resting on a small gas stove that still worked despite the power outage. The quiet rhythm of simple tasks somehow felt calming. There was no pressure to impress each other. No awkward attempt to force conversation. Every now and then one of us spoke, and the silence that followed never felt uncomfortable. Eventually Evelyn glanced toward the window where rain continued pouring across the dark glass. What brought you into the mountains during weather like this? She asked gently. I hesitated before answering. I was trying to outrun a life that no longer fits. She nodded as though she understood more than my words revealed. Sometimes people come here because they want beautiful photographs. Sometimes they come because they need somewhere quiet enough to hear themselves think. I looked at her with mild curiosity. Which one brought you here? A thoughtful smile crossed her face. Neither. I come every autumn because this place reminds me that even the strongest storms eventually leave. She spoke so calmly that I wondered what kind of heartbreak had taught her that lesson. The soup was ready a few minutes later. We carried 2 bowls to the small wooden table beside the fireplace while rain continued falling beyond the windows. Steam rose gently into the warm candlelight, filling the room with the comforting aroma of herbs and fresh bread. For the first time in what felt like forever, I realized I was not thinking about the divorce papers waiting inside my bag. I was simply sharing a quiet meal with someone whose kindness asked for nothing in return. After dinner, Evelyn showed me the small cabin so I would know where everything was. The bedroom tour lasted only a few seconds before both of us stopped at exactly the same moment. The room contained 1 dresser, 1 window overlooking the lake, and only 1 neatly made queen-size bed. Evelyn looked almost embarrassed. I completely forgot, she admitted softly. When I reserved the cabin, I never imagined I would have unexpected company. I looked from the bed to the couch in the living room, already realizing neither option would be as simple as either of us hoped. Outside, another wave of thunder rolled across the mountains, making it painfully clear that neither of us would be leaving before sunrise. I looked at the bed for a long moment before quietly shaking my head. You should keep the bedroom, I said. I can sleep on the couch. Evelyn immediately smiled, but it was the kind of smile people wear when they already know they are about to disagree. You have been driving for hours, she replied. That couch is older than both of us put together. It is comfortable for reading, not for sleeping. I glanced toward the fireplace, searching for another solution that did not exist. The cabin was charming, but it had clearly been built for peaceful weekends, not unexpected guests. Another crack of thunder rolled across the mountains, rattling the windows just enough to remind us that neither pride nor politeness would change reality. Evelyn folded her arms gently. We are both adults. We can share a bed without making it complicated. There was nothing flirtatious in her voice, only calm practicality. Somehow that made the suggestion feel even easier to accept. All right, I answered with a small laugh. But I promise I do not steal blankets. That is encouraging, she replied. Because I definitely do. We both laughed, and the last trace of awkwardness quietly slipped away. Before getting ready for bed, Evelyn disappeared into the kitchen and returned carrying 2 steaming mugs. Chamomile tea, she explained. It has rescued many restless nights. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic cup, grateful for the heat. Outside, rain continued tapping against the windows in a steady rhythm that sounded almost musical now that we were safe inside. We carried our tea to the living room and settled into 2 rocking chairs facing the fireplace. Flames danced across the stone walls while candlelight softened every corner of the room. For several quiet minutes neither of us spoke. I realized I did not feel pressured to fill the silence. It simply existed, peaceful and unhurried. Eventually Evelyn glanced toward the fire. You said earlier that your life no longer fit, she said gently. You do not have to explain if you would rather not. I watched the flames for a long moment before answering. I spent 30 years trying to become the person someone else needed. Somewhere along the way I forgot to ask who I wanted to become. The words surprised even me. I had never said them aloud before. Evelyn nodded slowly. That sounds exhausting. It was, I admitted. The strange part is that the loneliness did not begin after my marriage ended. It began years before either of us admitted something had changed. She looked into her cup before speaking again. Loneliness inside a relationship can feel heavier than loneliness by yourself. I turned toward her with quiet curiosity. You speak like someone who understands. A faint smile crossed her face, touched by sadness rather than regret. Ido. She rested her mug on the small wooden table beside her chair. 5 years ago I ended a relationship with a woman I truly loved. We were not cruel to each other. We simply wanted different futures and kept pretending compromise would eventually fix everything. It never did. I listened carefully. There was no bitterness in her voice. Only acceptance earned through time. After that, she continued, I started traveling more. Photographing places helped me remember that beautiful things continue existing, even after important chapters end. Her words settled quietly inside me. I had spent months believing my story had collapsed beyond repair. Yet here sat someone who had survived her own heartbreak without losing her ability to trust people. The fire crackled softly between us while the storm slowly drifted farther into the mountains. I found myself studying Evelyn without meaning to. The candlelight reflected gently in her blue eyes whenever she smiled. There was something deeply reassuring about the way she listened, as though every sentence deserved patience instead of interruption. It had been years since anyone had looked at me without expectation. She noticed me smiling and tilted her head playfully. What? I shook my head. I was just thinking that this is the most honest conversation I have had in a very long time. Her smile grew warmer. Maybe storms are good at introducing people to the versions of themselves they stopped letting anyone else see. When the fire finally burned lower, we quietly prepared for bed. We climbed beneath opposite sides of the blanket, careful to leave respectful space between us. The room remained completely silent except for rain falling softly beyond the window. I stared at the wooden ceiling, expecting awkwardness, but instead I felt something I had not experienced in months. Peace. The rain had softened into a gentle rhythm by the middle of the night, but sleep still refused to find me. I lay quietly on my side of the bed, listening to the steady crackle of the fireplace drifting in from the next room and the occasional whisper of wind brushing against the cabin walls. Beside me, Evelyn breathed slowly and evenly, her peaceful rhythm somehow making the room feel even calmer. I realized I had spent months falling asleep with my mind racing through old conversations, unanswered questions, and endless regrets. Tonight, for the first time in longer than I could remember, my thoughts felt strangely quiet. I turned carefully, hoping not to disturb her, and stared through the bedroom window where faint moonlight filtered between passing clouds. The storm was finally moving away. You are still awake too? Evelyn's gentle voice surprised me in the darkness. I smiled faintly. I thought I was being quiet. You were, she replied softly. But sometimes you can feel when another person is awake. We both remained still, looking toward the ceiling instead of at each other. Somehow that made honesty easier. Can I ask you something? She said after a moment. Of course. When was the last time someone took care of you instead of expecting you to take care of them? The question settled heavily inside me. I searched through years of memories before realizing I could not find an answer. I honestly do not know, I admitted. I became so used to solving everyone else's problems that eventually nobody noticed I had my own. Silence returned, but it no longer felt empty. It felt understanding. After several quiet moments, Evelyn spoke again. My mother used to tell me that strong women are often the ones people forget to comfort. I felt unexpected tears gathering in my eyes. Not because I was sad, but because someone had finally described a feeling I had never been able to explain. She sounds like a wise woman, I whispered. She was, Evelyn answered. She also believed that healing usually begins the moment we stop pretending we are fine. I slowly laughed through my tears. Then I suppose I have officially started healing tonight. We finally turned toward each other, separated by a respectful space that neither of us attempted to cross. The moon briefly emerged from behind the clouds, filling the room with pale silver light. I could see the kindness in Evelyn's eyes even without another word being spoken. There was no pressure. Between us, no expectation. Only the quiet comfort of two people who had survived different heartbreaks and somehow found themselves sharing the same peaceful night. Eventually we drifted into sleep, and when I opened my eyes again, soft morning light filled the bedroom. The storm had disappeared completely. Sunlight shimmered across the lake outside, transforming the dark water into a blanket of gold. For a few peaceful seconds I forgot where I was. Then I remembered the cabin, the unexpected company, and the strange sense of calm growing inside me. Evelyn was already awake, standing quietly on the porch with a steaming mug of coffee in her hands. I joined her a few minutes later, wrapping a borrowed sweater around my shoulders against the cool mountain air. The forest smelled of pine, cedar, and fresh rain. Tiny drops of water clung to every branch, sparkling beneath the early sunlight. "It almost looks like yesterday never happened," I said while watching the perfectly still lake. Evelyn smiled without taking her eyes off the horizon. Storms have a remarkable way of making the world look brand new. We stood together in comfortable silence until a pair of bald eagles soared across the water, their reflections gliding beneath them. Evelyn quietly reached for the camera resting beside the porch railing and captured the moment before lowering it again. "Some memories deserve photographs," she said softly. Then she looked at me with a thoughtful smile. "Others deserve to stay exactly where they happen." I did not answer immediately because something inside me had already begun changing. For the first time since my marriage ended, I was no longer measuring my future by everything I had lost. Instead, I found myself quietly wondering what unexpected beauty might still be waiting just beyond the next sunrise. The morning unfolded with a quiet gentleness that felt almost impossible after the violence of the storm. Sunlight filtered through the tall pines, warming the porch where Evelyn and I sat with fresh coffee in our hands. Every breath carried the clean scent of cedar and rain-soaked earth. Somewhere across the lake, a loon called softly and the sound echoed through the valley like a memory refusing to disappear. Evelyn eventually stood and picked up her camera. "Would you mind walking with me?" she asked. The light after a storm never lasts very long. I followed her down a narrow trail that curved along the shoreline. Fallen branches rested beside the path, but the forest itself seemed stronger than it had the day before. Tiny drops of water sparkled on every fern while sunlight slipped through the trees in bright ribbons. Evelyn occasionally stopped to photograph reflections on the water, or the distant mountain peaks emerging from the last traces of mist. Watching her work fascinated me. She never rushed. She waited patiently until the world revealed exactly what she wanted to capture. "You always seem to know the perfect moment," I said. She smiled without lowering the camera. "The moment is usually already there. Most people simply stop looking too soon." A few minutes later she turned toward me unexpectedly. "May I take your picture?" Instinctively I shook my head. I have never liked photographs of myself. She lowered the camera with quiet understanding. "May I ask why?" I looked toward the lake instead of answering immediately. For years I only saw the woman who disappointed herself. Eventually I stopped wanting reminders. Evelyn remained silent, giving me room to continue if I wished. I took a slow breath. After the divorce, I deleted almost every photograph of myself because I could not recognize the person smiling in them anymore. She studied me for a thoughtful moment before speaking. "I do not photograph people because they look perfect. I photograph the moment they stop pretending to be." Something about those words gently loosened the fear I had carried for so long. I nodded once. "All right." She lifted the camera but never asked me to pose. Instead, she encouraged me to keep walking naturally along the shoreline. I looked across the peaceful water while a cool breeze lifted a few strands of my hair. The shutter clicked only once. Evelyn lowered the camera almost immediately. "That is enough," she said with quiet satisfaction. Curious, I walked over as she showed me the image on the small screen. For several seconds I simply stared. The woman in the photograph looked tired but peaceful. There was sadness in her eyes, yet there was also hope beginning to return. For the first time in many years I did not immediately search for flaws.
I barely recognize her, he whispered.
Evelyn looked at the photograph again before answering. I think you are finally meeting her. My phone vibrated unexpectedly inside my jacket pocket, breaking the stillness of the morning. The signal had finally returned after the storm. I hesitated before checking the notification. It was a message from my attorney regarding the financial disclosures from my divorce. During the review of newly submitted records, investigators had discovered documentation showing that my former husband had purchased an engagement ring for someone else several months before he told me our marriage was ending. I read the message twice, hoping I had misunderstood it. My hand suddenly felt cold despite the sunlight. The timeline hurt more than the betrayal itself. It meant that while I had still been searching for ways to repair our marriage, he had already chosen another future. Evelyn quietly noticed the change in my expression. She never asked to read the message or demanded an explanation. Instead, she simply stepped beside me and waited. I closed the phone slowly, fighting the familiar weight pressing against my chest. I thought I had already reached the hardest part, I admitted softly. Apparently heartbreak can still find new ways to surprise you. Evelyn looked toward the calm lake before gently placing a reassuring hand against my shoulder for only a brief moment. Then let this place surprise you differently, she said. Do not let someone else's choices become the measure of your worth. Her words settled inside me with unexpected strength, yet deep beneath that fragile hope, an old fear quietly began whispering that perhaps I was not meant to find happiness again after all. For a long time neither of us spoke. The quiet around the lake no longer felt peaceful, yet it was not because anything had changed outside. The sunlight still shimmered across the water. The breeze still carried the scent of pine and cedar through the trees. Only my thoughts had become loud again. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and tried forcing a smile, but it disappeared almost as quickly as it came. Evelyn did not offer empty reassurance or tell me everything would be fine. Instead, she began walking slowly along the shoreline, trusting that I would follow when I was ready. I did. The gravel path curved gently through the forest where rainwater still clung to every leaf. After several minutes, I finally broke the silence. The hardest part is realizing I spent years blaming myself for something that had already ended in his heart. Evelyn nodded thoughtfully. Many kind people do that. They rewrite history until they become responsible for someone else's choices. I stopped walking and looked at the quiet lake stretching toward the distant mountains. I keep wondering whether I missed obvious signs. She smiled sadly. You probably noticed them. You just loved him enough to hope they meant something different. Her answer settled into me because it carried neither judgment nor pity. It carried understanding. We reached the wooden overlook where the valley opened beneath endless rows of evergreen trees. Someone had carved a sentence into the old railing many years earlier. Every season teaches something the last one could not. I traced the faded letters with my fingertips while Evelyn leaned against the railing beside me. Do you ever regret falling in love? I asked quietly. She answered without hesitation. No. I regret the years I spent believing one ending meant my heart had finished growing. Those words stayed with me as we began walking back toward the cabin. By the time we returned, the afternoon sun had climbed higher into a bright blue sky. Evelyn suggested we make sandwiches before checking whether the road had reopened. Working together in the small kitchen felt surprisingly natural. We reached for the same loaf of bread at the same moment and both laughed before either of us pulled away. It was a tiny moment, almost forgettable, yet something about that shared smile lingered long after we sat down to eat. I realized I had stopped measuring every conversation against the pain waiting for me at home. Instead, I found myself paying attention to the woman sitting across the table, to the kindness in her voice and the calm confidence with which she moved through ordinary moments. A knock on the front door interrupted lunch. Evelyn opened it to find the same park ranger standing on the porch. His rain jacket was finally dry, and a welcome smile crossed his face. Good news, he announced. The crews cleared the mudslide faster than expected. The highway is open again. I thanked him sincerely, but as the words left my mouth, an unexpected heaviness settled inside my chest. Yesterday I would have given anything to leave this mountain. Now the thought of driving away felt strangely painful. After the ranger departed, the cabin became very quiet. Evelyn folded the map she had been studying and looked toward me with gentle understanding. I suppose this is where our unexpected adventure ends. I nodded, unable to trust my voice for several seconds. We packed our belongings without rushing, each quiet movement seeming to acknowledge that something important had changed even though neither of us had found the courage to name it. Before loading my suitcase into the back of my SUV, Evelyn disappeared inside for a brief moment. When she returned, she handed me a small instant photograph she had printed from the portrait she captured beside the lake earlier that morning. On the back she had written only 5 simple words. "Remember the woman you found here?" I held the photograph carefully, feeling emotion rise once more. "Thank you," I whispered. She smiled with the same gentle warmth that had greeted me at the cabin door the night before. "Drive safely, Claire." I climbed into my vehicle, started the engine, and slowly pulled away from the cabin. In the rearview mirror I watched Evelyn grow smaller beside the porch until the trees finally hid her from view. I told myself that some people are simply meant to cross our path for a single unforgettable moment. I had no way of knowing that fate was quietly preparing one more chapter neither of us could possibly foresee. The drive home should have marked the end of a strange weekend, yet every mile only made the silence beside me feel louder. The instant photograph Evelyn had given me rested on the passenger seat, tucked safely inside my journal so it would not bend. At every stoplight I found myself glancing toward it, remembering the calm expression on my own face in the picture. I still found it difficult to believe that I was looking at myself. The woman in that photograph seemed lighter than the one who had driven into the mountains only 2 days earlier. Over the following week, life returned to its familiar routine. I met with my attorney to finalize the remaining financial paperwork. I packed more boxes inside the house that no longer felt like home. Friends invited me to dinner, but I politely declined, telling them I needed time alone. The truth was more complicated. I did not want noise. I wanted the kind of quiet I had discovered beside that mountain lake. More than once I considered sending Evelyn a message. We had exchanged phone numbers before leaving the cabin. Yet every time I opened my contacts, uncertainty stopped me. What if I had mistaken kindness for connection? What if that weekend had meant far more to me than it had to her? Days passed before I finally gathered enough courage to write a simple text. "I hope you made it home safely. Thank you again for everything." I read the message 3 times before pressing send. Hours passed without a reply. Evening arrived. Then another day. By the end of the week my message still showed as undelivered. I quietly convinced myself that perhaps this was the way some beautiful moments were supposed to remain, complete without becoming permanent. The following Saturday my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. An elderly woman introduced herself as the owner of the lakeside cabin. My heart immediately quickened. "I hope I am not disturbing you," she said warmly. "Evelyn asked me to contact you if I ever had a way to reach you." I sat down immediately. "Is everything all right?" "She is safe," the woman assured me. The morning after you both left, Evelyn received a call that her older sister had been admitted to the hospital unexpectedly. She drove there immediately. During the trip her phone was damaged beyond repair, and she lost many of her contacts before they could be restored. Relief swept through me so suddenly that I closed my eyes. Every fear I had quietly built over the past several days dissolved in an instant. She had not ignored me. Life had simply carried her somewhere neither of us expected. Before ending the call, the cabin owner hesitated. "There is something else," she said gently. "Evelyn left a notebook here before she rushed away. She told me she planned to return for it once things settled with her sister. She also said that if you happened to visit before she did, I should let you read the final page." I thanked her and ended the call, but my thoughts refused to settle. Nearly 2 weeks passed before I finally found myself driving back toward the mountains. This time the sky was brilliantly clear, and the winding roads that had once frightened me now felt strangely familiar. When I reached the cabin, the owner greeted me with a warm embrace before handing me the worn leather notebook. I carried it to the same porch where Evelyn and I had shared coffee after the storm. Most of the pages contained travel sketches, photographs taped beside handwritten memories, and reflections from places she had visited over the years. Near the end I found the final entry, dated the morning we said goodbye. It read, "I did not expect one storm to remind me that my heart still recognized peace when it found it. If our paths cross again, I hope it is because we both choose the journey, Not because circumstances leave us nowhere else to go. I had barely finished reading those words when slow footsteps echoed across the wooden dock behind me. I looked up instinctively, and there she was, carrying her repaired camera over one shoulder, smiling with the same quiet warmth that had first welcomed me inside the cabin. This time there was no storm between us, only the unmistakable feeling that fate had gently opened one more door. For a moment neither of us moved. The breeze carried the scent of pine across the porch while sunlight shimmered gently on the lake behind her. Evelyn looked almost exactly as I remembered, except there was a softness in her expression that had not been there before, as though the weeks spent caring for her sister had quietly changed her as well. She laughed first, the sound warm and genuine. "I had a feeling you might come back someday," she admitted. I smiled, still holding her notebook in my hands. "I almost did not." She slowly walked onto the porch and glanced toward the open pages resting on my lap. "Then I am glad you changed your mind." For several seconds we simply looked at each other, neither of us rushing to fill the silence. The connection between us felt different now. The storm had forced us into the same space, but today nothing was forcing either of us to stay. Every moment from this point forward would be a choice. Evelyn sat beside me on the weathered wooden bench overlooking the lake. "My sister is recovering well," she said with visible relief. "She keeps telling everyone that life is too short to postpone the people who matter." I smiled gently. "She sounds very wise." Evelyn nodded. "She usually is." We spent the next hour walking the familiar trail beside the shoreline, revisiting the places where so many quiet conversations had unfolded only weeks earlier. The overlook was still there, surrounded by towering evergreens. The same carved message remained on the old railing, reminding strangers that every season carries its own lesson. This time we stood closer together, not because circumstance required it, but because neither of us felt the need to create unnecessary distance anymore. As we continued walking, I realized something unexpected. During my marriage, I had often felt alone while standing beside another person. With Evelyn, even our silences felt shared. "Can I tell you something that feels embarrassing?" I asked quietly. She looked at me with immediate kindness. "You can tell me anything." I laughed softly before taking a slow breath. "When my text message never reached you, I convinced myself I had imagined everything we experienced here. I thought maybe I had mistaken gratitude for something deeper." Evelyn stopped walking and turned toward me completely. "Claire, I spent those same days worrying that you had already forgotten me." We both smiled at the absurdity of our fears. "It seems we are equally talented at overthinking," I said. "That might be our first official thing in common," she replied with a quiet laugh. By late afternoon we returned to the cabin carrying sandwiches from a nearby country store. We ate lunch on the porch while watching sunlight dance across the water. The conversation flowed easily from childhood memories to favorite books, family traditions, and dreams we had quietly abandoned over the years. There was no need to impress one another. Every story felt welcomed exactly as it was. As the sun slowly began its descent behind the mountains, Evelyn looked toward the lake before speaking again. "I have been thinking about something since the day we met." My heartbeat quickened despite myself. "What is that?" She turned toward me, her blue eyes calm and steady. "The first time we shared this place, neither of us chose the circumstances. The weather decided everything. Where we stayed, how long we remained, even where we slept." She smiled gently before continuing. "I would like the next chapter to be different." I waited quietly, giving her the same patience she had always given me. "Would you have dinner with me next weekend?" she asked. "Not because we are stranded. Not because we have nowhere else to go. Simply because I would like to know you beyond one extraordinary weekend." My answer arrived before doubt could interrupt it. "Yes," I whispered, smiling more freely than I had in years. Evelyn reached for my hand slowly, giving me every opportunity to step away if I wished. Instead, I intertwined my fingers with hers. The gesture felt simple, gentle, and completely natural. As we watched the evening sunlight settle over the quiet lake, I realized the greatest change in my life had not been surviving the end of my marriage. It had been discovering that after enough healing, the heart eventually stops asking whether it deserves love and quietly begins accepting it when it finally arrives. 1 year later, I returned to the mountains carrying far less than I had the first time. My luggage was lighter. My heart was lighter too. The familiar road wound. Through the towering pines beneath a clear autumn sky. And for the first time I smiled before the lake even came into view. The cabin stood exactly where I remembered it. Warm cedar walls glowing beneath the afternoon sun. Evelyn was already waiting on the porch, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee with the same quiet smile that had first welcomed me inside during the storm. "You are right on time," she said. I laughed softly. That is a sentence nobody used to say about me. She handed me one of the mugs before taking my free hand as naturally as breathing. Nothing about our relationship had happened quickly. After that afternoon beside the lake, we chose each other through ordinary moments instead of grand promises. We learned each other's routines, celebrated small victories, and stayed present through difficult days. We visited Evelyn's sister often after her recovery, shared long weekend drives through the Pacific Northwest, and slowly built a life where neither of us felt responsible for carrying the other. Instead, we walked beside one another with equal strength. I had finally sold the house that once held the memories of my marriage. Packing those final boxes had been emotional, but it no longer felt like losing my past. It felt like making room for a future I had once believed was impossible. I also returned to architectural consulting part-time, choosing projects that inspired me instead of simply filling my calendar. Evelyn continued traveling with her camera, capturing quiet places that reminded people beauty still existed in everyday life. Whenever our schedules allowed, I joined her, sometimes carrying my sketchbook while she searched patiently for the perfect light. That afternoon we walked the familiar trails circling the lake. The overlook remained unchanged, and the old carved message still greeted every visitor. Every season teaches something the last one could not. I smiled as I gently traced the weathered letters once again. "Last year I thought this sentence was talking about nature," I said quietly. Evelyn squeezed my hand. "Now." I looked toward the endless mountains stretching beyond the trees. "Now I think it has always been talking about people." We continued walking until we reached the shoreline where she had taken my photograph after the storm. She reached into her backpack and carefully handed me a small framed print. It was the same picture, but this time another photograph rested beside it inside the frame. The newer image showed both of us standing together on the same shoreline only a few weeks earlier, smiling beneath bright autumn leaves. "I wanted you to have both," she said softly. "One reminds us who you found. The other reminds us who we became." Tears gathered in my eyes, but they carried gratitude instead of grief. As the sun slowly disappeared behind the mountains, we returned to the porch and settled into the old rocking chairs with fresh coffee warming our hands. The evening air felt cool, peaceful, and wonderfully familiar. I looked toward the lake where calm water reflected the fading colors of the sky. It was difficult to believe that one unexpected storm had once frightened me so deeply. Now I understood that it had never arrived to ruin my plans. It had quietly redirected them. I spent years believing the end of one love story meant my happiest days had already passed. I was wrong. Sometimes life gently removes the future we thought we wanted so it can introduce us to the one we never imagined asking for. I no longer measure happiness by certainty or perfect timing. I measure it by honesty, quiet mornings, shared laughter, and the peace of standing beside someone who sees every part of me without asking me to become someone else. If this journey has taught me anything, it is that hearts do not heal because time passes. They heal because one day we choose to stop living inside yesterday, and finally allow ourselves to believe that tomorrow still has beautiful surprises waiting, just beyond the next sunrise.